Wednesday, we have installed as a new president, and every 4 or 8 years, we have this ceremony that we do to inaugurate the next president, and each year or each time, it has been a peaceful transfer of power. Now, with the exception of a few rowdies that got into the Capitol this year, I expect that will be the same. But we are inheriting something that has been practiced as an experiment for over 200 years. And if you think about it, that isn't that long for a country to exist, because there's some countries in the world that are thousands of years old. However, to be able to govern a country by the will of the people is an experiment, because this is the first time that the people are the ones that grant the government power. All the rest of the time in history, the government has granted to the people their rights and their liberties. It was either the kings, or it was, in the case of England, the Parliament. But there wasn't a constitution like ours that guaranteed that not only the people had rights, but also they weren't from the government, they were from God. And that anything that we give up to the government that they need to help govern is because we decided to do it that way, which is a unique thing. I was standing in Lexington, Massachusetts, on what they call the Battle Green a few years ago. And they have preserved as much as possible what it looked like on that day when the Revolutionary War battles started. I believe it was 1775. And as I looked around at the houses, I saw that about 9 out of 10 houses had this black strip of paint along the top of the chimneys. And I asked somebody, what is that for? Because I've never seen that before. And what it was, that because it had been, the colonies had been governed by the king and parliament in England for so long, they had become accustomed to it, and those are the houses where they're saying, we are loyal to the king. So that when the British troops would come, they wouldn't ransack those houses because they were loyal British subjects. At the start of the war, there was only 10% of the people in the colonies that believed that the war should happen. 10%. And they started a war over that. What happened was the British troops were garrisoned in Boston, and they were getting reports that the colonists were starting to collect weapons in the town of Concord, and Lexington is about halfway in between. And so there was patriots that decided that they were going to stand on the road at this point in the middle of the town of Lexington, and they were going to hinder the British troops. Now, any man in his right mind realized that they weren't going to stand up to seasoned soldiers. That were several hundred seasoned soldiers that were marching down the road. And these were maybe a couple dozen patriots. And so they stood and they refused to move. Now that's what I call being fully persuaded, because these guys had big guns and big bayonets at the end of the guns. Nobody knew who fired the first shot, but a shot was fired. And then the British soldiers opened up. And a few shots were returned by the Patriots. But for the most part, most of them died. And there's even stories of one man who crawled back to his front step of his house and died in his wife's arms. These guys were what I call fully persuaded. They were so convinced of the righteousness of their cause that they were willing to stand in harm's way. Nothing really happens until we become fully convinced. As long as we are partially convinced or partially persuaded, we don't do anything. But when we are fully persuaded and fully convinced that something is right, that's when action happens. There's one man talked about in the Bible. It's called the father of believing. You talk about being fully persuaded. That is the definition of believing. And we'll go to Romans chapter 4, verse 17. I'll read you about him. Now, this is Paul explaining about believing and what it takes to be a believer. In verse 17, it says, "As it is written, I have made thee a father of many nations." Now, it was written in the Old Testament, and this is God talking to Abraham. I have made thee a father of many nations. Now, this was a guy without a child. But this has already been put in the past tense. Do you see that? It's already being described by God as a past tense event, but he doesn't even have a child yet. He's 99 years old. 99 years old. And he still doesn't have the child. I'll read on. "Before him whom he believed, even God, who quickeneth the dead, or make alive the dead, and calleth those things which be not as though they were." There's many things that God has told us about himself and about our future in the past tense. By his stripes you were healed. That's a past tense event, isn't it? Well, this is the start of believing. This is the start of becoming fully persuaded. First, we have to have a word to believe. Somebody has to tell us something. And in the case when God tells us something, then we have a right to be fully persuaded that it is true. There's a lot of things in life that we are fully persuaded on. Anybody have a doubt that the earth revolves around the sun?
No.
Why? Because it can be scientifically proven.
Yeah.
There are boatloads of things that we are fully persuaded on that sometimes we don't even know why. But there has been some kind of evidence or proof that they're true, and we believe it. And this is good. We haven't been able to advance as a society or as a culture unless some things have been assumed to be true. But those are all things that can be proven. With God, things doesn't happen until you first believe, and then you see it proved. For most of mankind, it is, I want to see it first, and then I'll believe it. With God, it is, believe it, and then you'll see it. So, verse 18, "Who against hope believed in hope." God gave him this word that he was the father of many nations earlier, before he turned 99, okay? So he was hoping against hope that he might become the father of many nations, according to that which was spoken, "So shall thy seed be." And not being weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead. Okay, so he wasn't dead literally, but his ability to have a child was done. That's what it means by having his body being dead. Now, we have a lot of things in our own life that looks like it's impossible. This is impossible. I've been living with this for years. But the truth is, there's nothing's impossible with God. If God's able to raise the dead, certainly he can make it so that Abraham can have a child. That's a little thing compared to being raised from the dead, right?
Right.
And being not weak in faith, he considered not his own body now dead, when he was about 100 years old, neither yet the deadness of Sarah's womb. All right, she was, I think she was about 10 years behind him. She was way past having children. Verse 20, he staggered not at the promise of God through unbelief, but was strong in faith or believing, giving glory to God. So no matter what the situation looks like, we still give God the glory that he will keep his word. And being fully persuaded, no doubts, no well maybes. He was fully persuaded, and therefore he acted like it. He moved forward as though this was going to happen at any moment, because he was fully persuaded that what he had been promised, he was able also to perform. And therefore it was imputed or counted to him for righteousness. Now it was not written for his sake alone that it was imputed to him, but for us also, to whom it shall be imputed, if we believe on him that raised up Jesus our Lord from the dead, who was delivered for our offenses and was raised again for our justification. Now let's break that down for a second. Most people in the world have great doubts concerning their own mortalities, right? And they fear it. Unless you're young, then you don't fear anything.
Right.
You think you're going to live forever. But eventually you come to the point to where the death is imminent, or at least within the foreseeable future, and you just don't know. You just don't know what happens. Because I'm a human being. I have thoughts, I have feelings, I have experiences. I want this to go on. So what is the answer to that? The answer is that we have a hope that God will do what he says he's going to do. And just as Abraham had that full persuasion, it was not just for him. It was so that we would know that God is faithful and that we are being made righteous and that we were justified through the death and the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because it can't be by what you can do. Can you raise yourself up? Can you give yourself a new body?
Nope.
If I could, I would have done it a long time ago.
Me too.
But the point is that only God can do this. And that's why it is by faith and not by works of what any man can do. What we are fully persuaded about. What are we fully persuaded about? So we can look around us and believe what can be proven by our five senses, or we can also be fully persuaded that God is true and that he is the Father of Jesus Christ and that he will do what he says he's going to do. In John chapter 4, verse 6, this is a story. Jesus is going through the area of Samaria. Samaria was that area on the other side of the tracks. You ever grow up in a town where the other side of the tracks is where the poor and the rough area is? Well, the Samaritans was considered kind of like second-class citizens by the Jews. And he was going through Samaria and was stopping at the well where Jacob had dug many, many years before. And there a woman from town was drawing water from the well. Verse 6, now Jacob's well was there. Jesus, therefore, being wearied with his journey, sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour. There cometh a woman of Samaria to draw water. Jesus said to her, give me drink. For his disciples were gone away into the city to buy meat. It's like a woman going to the bathroom. Come on, girls, let's all go to the bathroom. We got to go buy meat, guys. Let's all go. We're going to bring back a lot of meat. So it leaves Jesus sitting on the well. Verse 9. Then saith the woman of Samaria unto him, how is it that thou, being a Jew, askest me to drink, which am a woman of Samaria? For the Jews have no dealings with the Samaritans. Now you know what? Jesus answered and said to her, if thou givest the gift of God, and who is it that saith to thee, give me drink? Thou wouldest have asked of him, and he would have given thee living water. In other words, if you realized who I really was, you'll be asking me to give you something to drink, but I would give you living water. The woman saith to him, sir, thou hast nothing to draw with, and the well is deep. From whence then hast thou that living water? In other words, zing, right over. Didn't get it at all. Which is understandable. You know, she hadn't met the Son of God ever before.
Right.
Didn't realize he talked in riddles sometimes. All right. Art thou greater than our father Jacob, which gave us the well and drank thereof himself, and his children and his cattle? Jesus answering said to her, whosoever drinketh of this water shall thirst again. But whosoever drinketh of the water that I shall give him shall never thirst. But the water that I shall give him shall be in him a well of water springing up into everlasting life. In other words, when you receive what Jesus Christ is giving, and for the people there, it was the word that he spoke. When that was received into their hearts, it was no longer empty,
Nice.
but it was quenching thirst that was there, had always been there. And it was gushing forth life because it had been coming from within. The woman said to him, sir, give me this water that I thirst not, neither come thither to draw. She's still looking out on a very earthly plane here.
But she wanted it.
Yeah. So I don't want to have to keep running over here to get every time I'm thirsty. Give me something I don't thirst again. In other words, she didn't understand still. And Jesus said to her, go, call thy husband and come hither. And the woman answered and said, I have no husband. Jesus said to her, thou hast well said, I have no husband, for thou hast had 5 husbands, and he whom thou hast is not thy husband. In that saidest thou truly. The woman saith to him, sir, I perceive that thou art a prophet. Well, now she's starting to get her eyes open. Here this guy's telling her life story. And of course, never met before. Our fathers worshipped in this mountain, and ye say that in Jerusalem is the place where men ought to worship. Now you start to get the breakdown of the different things that the Samaritans believed compared to the Jews. The Jews believed that you had to worship at the temple in Jerusalem. The Samaritans believed that there was a mountain in their territory. That's where you go to worship. She probably could see it from where she was at. Okay. 21. Jesus said to her, woman, believe me, the hour cometh when you shall neither in this mountain nor yet at Jerusalem worship the Father. Okay, knew something coming. Okay, there's going to be a new way to worship God. Ye worship him, ye worship ye know not what. Well, that's a tongue twister, isn't it? We know what we worship, for salvation is of the Jews. But the hour cometh, and now is, when the true worshipers shall worship the Father, how? In spirit and in truth. For the Father seeketh such to worship him. So it's come time when it doesn't matter where you're standing. Because wherever you're standing, you have the Spirit. You can have the Spirit wherever you're standing. Not where you're standing is going to be important. Because you carry the Spirit of God within you. And that's how come we can worship him in spirit and in truth. Verse 24, God is spirit, and they that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Wait a second. What about all the Mosaic laws? What about all the ways that we have to do the temple sacrifices? What about all those things? No. It's all going to change. The woman said to him, I know that Messiah cometh, which is called Christ. When he is come, he will tell us all things. She said to her, I that speak unto thee am he. And upon this came his disciples and marveled that he talked with the woman. Yet no man said, what seekest thou? Or why talkest thou to her? In other words, they kept their mouth shut. They're just amazed. He's carrying on a conversation with a Samaritan woman. What is going on here? This guy's full of surprises. The woman then left her water pot and went her way into the city and saith to the men, come, see a man which told me all things which ever I did. Is not this the Christ? Then they went out of the city and came unto him. In other words, she got their curiosity going, because she must have been respected or she wouldn't have been listened to. So they came out and wanted to hear what this guy has to say. In the meanwhile, while his disciples prayed him, saying, Master, eat. Prayed means tried to encourage him. They didn't get down on their hands and knees. Oh, Jesus, please eat.
Right.
But he said unto them, I have meat to eat that ye know not of. Again, talking in a riddle here, talking spiritual stuff. Therefore said the disciples one to another, hath any brought him aught to eat? Jesus saith to them, my meat is to do the will of him that sent me and to finish his work. Does that sound like someone who is fully persuaded? It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Fully persuaded. Jesus Christ was fully persuaded of his mission. Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh the harvest? Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes and look on the fields, for they are white, already to harvest. 5 senses wise, it was going to be 4 months after the planting that they were going to harvest, right?
Right.
And that is what a lot of Christians think, is that all this great stuff that God has in mind, somebody else is going to do. They're going to witness, they're going to under shepherd, they're going to teach the word, they're going to do signs, miracles, and wonders. All that is for somebody else to do. I'm just sitting here waiting. I'll go to church sometimes. I'll go do some other things that maybe I'll go down to the food pantry and pass out food, or I'll do other good works and stuff. But somebody else has got to do this kind of stuff. And he said, don't look for the future to do the will of God. to do the harvesting. And then about that time, all the people coming out of the city, which most of them were white in those days, the white robes and stuff. Look, the fields are all ready to harvest. In other words, they're coming to you right now. And he then received wages and gathered fruit unto life eternal, that both he and the sower and he that reapeth may rejoice together. And herein is that saying true, one soweth, another reapeth. I sent you to reap that whereon ye bestowed no labor. No man laboreth. Ye are entered into their labors. And many of the Samaritans of that city believed on him for the saying of the woman, which testified, he told me all that ever I did. So when the Samaritans were come to him, they besought him that he would tarry with them, and he abode there 2 days. And many more believed because of his own word. They came because they believed the woman. They believed because they heard Jesus Christ. And said unto the woman, now we believe, not because of thy sayings, for we have heard him ourselves, and know that this is indeed the Christ, the Savior of the world. All we have to do is give him a chance. That's all we have to do. Let the walls down. Give yourself a chance. That's all you have to do. And he will convince you. It's his words that will decide what's in the heart and what's going to stay. Now, after 2 days, he departed thence and went into Galilee. Many will almost get to the place of being fully persuaded. In Acts 26, verse 24, here Paul is witnessing to a Roman official. His name was Festus. And he is he's under arrest. Okay. And then Festus is going to be the one to decide whether he goes on to Rome as a prisoner or he's released. Verse 24. And he, as he thus spake for himself, Festus said with a loud voice, Paul, thou art beside thyself. Much learning doth make thee mad. You're crazy. You're crazy, man. But he said, I am not mad, most noble Festus, but speak forth the words of truth and soberness. For the king knoweth of these things, wherefore whom also I speak freely. For I am persuaded that none of these things are hidden from him. For this thing was not done in a corner. King Agrippa, believest thou the prophets? I know that thou believest. Then King Agrippa said unto Paul, almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. Almost. I heard what you had to say. Sounds good, but I don't believe. But he got the chance. Got the chance to believe. And Paul said, I would to God that not only thou, but also all that hear me this day were both almost and altogether such as I am, except these bonds. In other words, he was in chains. He was standing before the magistrate and he says, I wish you were like me, except for these chains. The word is a living word and is for the eternal now. We have been sent to preach the good news of Jesus Christ. That's our commission. Jesus Christ had his commission. We have our commission. It is not someone else's job, but it is ours to do. To do this now, we must be fully persuaded. Romans 14, verse 4. Romans 14, verse 4. Now, this is in the context of not judging one another, because we're not all going to believe the same thing at the same time. Okay? But if we're on the same road, we'll eventually get to the same spot. Verse 4. Who art thou that judgeth another man's servant? To his servant, to his own master he standeth or falleth. Yea, he shall be holden up, for God is able to make him stand. One man esteemeth one day above another, another esteemeth every day alike. Let every man be fully persuaded in his own mind. In other words, whatever you do, be fully persuaded that it's right.
Yeah.
Do you see that? Yet still meek enough to receive further instructions so that you can continue learning. But never do anything that you believe is wrong. He that regardeth the day regardeth it unto the Lord, and he that regardeth not the day to the Lord, he doth not regard it. In other words, some people like holy days, and some people say the holy days are done. But whatever way you work it, do it being fully persuaded. He that eateth, eateth to the Lord, for he giveth God thanks, and he that eateth not to the Lord, he eateth not, and giveth God thanks. Sorry, my voice is kind of going here, but the church was a mixture of Jews and Gentiles at this point. Well, what did the Jews not like to eat? Pork, shellfish, that kind of stuff. Everything that was in the Mosaic law not to eat. The Gentiles coming in, they like everything. They like everything on their pizza. Just put it all on there. They didn't care. Thing is, be fully persuaded of what you're eating. Because if you're not, okay, let's say a Jew goes to a Gentile's home and he's given pork chops.
Uh-oh.
But he haven't quite reached the point to where he understands that that's not a problem. Well, I don't say this to go, oh, you stupid Jew. Why don't you like pork chops? No. If I know it's going to bother him, I don't serve him pork chops.
Right.
Do you see that? All right. Give him a chance. Give him a chance to learn. Verse 7. For none of us liveth to himself, and no man dieth to himself. For whether we live unto the Lord, and whether we die unto the Lord. Whether we live, therefore, or die, we are the Lord's. So, doesn't matter what your background's been. We are still one in the Lord. When you accept Jesus Christ, it's like the big tent. It's like the all-uncovering, welcoming home. We're all welcome. And then we will start to learn what the will of God really is. Let us hold back nothing. Now, never leave part in reserve. Don't leave part of your heart in reserve. Well, I just got to keep this to myself. You got to give it all to be fully persuaded, because then we do it. Romans 15, we'll finish up here. Romans 15, verse 17. Yeah, I'm getting photobombed now. I have therefore, whereof I may glory through Jesus Christ in those things which pertaineth to God. For I will not dare to speak any of those things which Christ hath not wrought by me, to make the Gentiles obedient by word and deed. in the context, the church of the Jewish believers was given to Peter to minister to. The church of the Gentile believers was given to Paul to minister to. And this was where his calling was. He was supposed to give the word to the Gentiles. And this is what he's referring to. Through many signs and wonders. So as he went forth to speak, it wasn't just in word only, it was in action. And the action was the action that God wanted to see happen. Signs, miracles, and wonders. They follow those that believe, those that are fully persuaded. By the power of the Spirit of God, so that from Jerusalem and round about unto Iconium, I have fully preached the gospel of Christ. It's fully preached, nothing held back. He gave it all. Just as those long ago participated and stood on Lexington Green, let us be fully persuaded to do what God said he will do. Many signs and wonders are waiting for us right now. Okay.